I'm Dr. Percy Thomas, Provost of Continuing Education at Montgomery College. Have You Heard is a program that brings you topics of interest to the Montgomery County community. And today we have a topic that I am sure will be of interest to you. Transforming lust into love. A great topic, and we have back again on our show the great spiritual leader, Swami Krishnapad, the head of the Institute for Applied Spiritual Technology. Welcome, my friend Swami, back to the show.
We're happy to be here again.
Look, man, I cannot keep up with you. I mean, you are all over the world. Skip keeps me informed that you're in India and Africa, and then you're in Chicago and New York, and then you're in Europe. Do you let any grass grow under your feet?
As we once said, sometimes about every 2 weeks or so, we're in a different country. And because we're very concerned with the present problems that the world is facing, and we're very interested in helping to provide technologies to make a difference. So we try to move around to do our part.
Okay, technologies to make a difference is a good lead-in to just a brief, because you've been on the show before, just a brief understanding of the Institute and what it's about and what your goals and what your worldwide objectives are. Could you just...
The Institute helps to facilitate my work as an African chief, as an African-American monk, and also as a scholar of international law. We constantly look at some of the problems that societies are facing, individuals, leaders, corporations, institutions, and we try to help people to realize that every material problem has a metaphysical and, most important, a spiritual counterpart. So we bring information to workshops, seminars, lectures, and so many alternative projects to help people to be able to address these things.
Okay, now, that's heavy. Break that down.
It means we have different alternative communities, just like the one I just came from today, outside of Harrisburg, where we have 400 acres of land. And so we're looking at ways how to become more self-sufficient. So we're trying to build our own houses, grow our own food, make our own medicine.
Sounds like you're building an ecosystem where people survive and
That's right.
energize, self-perpetuate, and live a very healthy lifestyle.
That's right, because if we just give people only knowledge without an environment to be able to activate that, then it's kind of wishful thinking. So there's a need for people to have more information about the human condition and to have a greater sense of cultural support that allows them to be able to activate that.
Worldwide, how many people are following your Vedic teachings?
Oh, there are millions, millions. Particularly in India, we find that the majority of Indians have direct contact with the Vedic system. You see, if you analyze it, you'll see some of the top thinkers in the Western world now are looking at non-Western conceptions. They're looking at alternative schemes in education and business. They're looking at stress management, dealing with meditation and diet, and areas about nutrition that are very kind of non-Western in some sense. People are getting to more contemplative sort of things. We see in the area of medicine. It's like in a short time I'll be giving a presentation at the American Medical Association where I'll be addressing concerns about alternative health techniques. Now this is becoming very, very in vogue. And all of these things are really somewhat outside of the general orthodox Western view. And if we look close, many of these things are Afro-Asiatic. So much of my teachings are based on that platform.
So you're going to be down there with all those doctors. Now, I understand they're a difficult crew.
They were difficult, but now they're seeing that millions and millions of dollars are being spent for alternative health care. And they want to get that money back.
So they want to come back to school, and you're there to teach them.
See, people are voting with their pockets, their money. And so in many areas, just like in the multinational business field, the CEOs are realizing that to take better care of people, to be more concerned with dealing with stress, conflict considerations, is going to produce money, greater productivity.
Right. Now, you wrote a book on leadership. What was the title of that book?
Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness.
Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness. And I'm going to tell you a little story about that, because I read the book, and I was so impressed with the book, I referred it to a friend of mine that is a distinguished professor at the University of Baltimore who does leadership and business training. He took the book and incorporated it in his classes. I teach leadership at Johns Hopkins University, and it just totally missed me. And my students this semester were saying, well, Dr. Thomas, we like what you teach, but it's not dealing with spirituality. We are African-American people, and we bring a spirituality to the workplace, and we want to know how to make it fit appropriately. Well, if I just put the book on the reading list, I would have dealt with that, right?
Yes. And it's a unique book.
Yeah.
See, my last two books are being printed in 5 different languages: Russian, Japanese, Spanish, Italian, French, and also they're being used in several courses and with a lot of organizations.
Okay. We're going to talk about that because I'm going to try to convince you to come here to the college because you have a message for young people, old people, and people in between. Couple of things. I noticed on my information package that you're going to be in Cleveland, Detroit, Massachusetts, and Florida. You're featured speakers in Atlanta and some other places. Could you just hit the highlight places that you're going to be in?
Well, just in summary, I'll be on a 20-city book tour. And in between that, I'll be speaking at some major events. It's like at the American Medical Association, at the National Conference for Religious Editors. I've been asked to be one of a major speaker. Because see, many of the things I'm talking about are things that people are quite not aware of. I mean, it's sort of an interesting angle to deal with such ancient wisdom, spirituality, and to apply it with the issues that are so, cutting edge at this particular time.
Okay.
And so we bring a very interesting flavor to some of these discussions.
Okay, let's go to this new book, because, I could pull out at least 15 books that you've written I know about and things. But your new book, Leadership for an Age of Higher Consciousness, was the first,
That's right.
the management book, right?
That's right.
But your new book is The Spiritual Warrior 2, and there was a Spiritual Warrior 1, I can remember. But the focus of this new book is going to raise a lot of hair on the backs of people's necks and attention because it's Spiritual Warrior 2, transforming lust into love. And let's get into that right now. Swami, you're a holy man. I've said this to you before. You're a spiritual man. What are you doing in this area of lust and love?
That's why I'm a spiritual man. It's concomitant. This book came out right about a week before Valentine's Day. The religious editor of Washington Post, wanted me to make this presentation as a message to the nation, as a matter of fact. And so, as there's so many issues now dealing with promiscuousness, at that time it was sort of the height of some of the discussions about our President Clinton. And so my book, the very first chapter, deals with sex and the leadership crisis. Knowing that I've been a celibate for over 22 years, deals so much with helping people in conferences and individual connections with dealing with relationship issues, they felt that this would be a very interesting book to be able to make available to America, and of course it's going around the world now. So many people are reading this, and about every other day I'm getting letters from all over the world, people telling me it's saved their relationship, their marriage, it's helped them to understand better about homosexuality, it's allowed them to understand about sexuality from a physiological, psychological, metaphysical, and spiritual perspective.
Okay, but that's heavy stuff. Let's come back where the rubber hits the road. Right now, we have a man in the White House. He's been besieged for his entire time as president with sexual scandal, sexual innuendo. I wasn't there. I don't know if it's true or not. By his own admission, at least one case was true. What does sexual energy have to do with leading a nation? And secondly, there are people out there saying, he's doing a good job with the economy. Why should we worry? Why should we worry?
See, in the book and in the article, I also discuss about the importance of private life and public life being similar. Because the public life is more of a performance. The private life is what the individual is really about. According to the private life, we can understand more about that person, the mindset of that individual, and the kind of things that are ultimately going to come out in the policies. Power is often affiliated with lust, desire to control, to conquer over, and even to manipulate and to exploit. When that power is self-centered and not based on selflessness, then we have lust. When it is based on selflessness, it becomes compassion, it becomes love, and it becomes that which engenders powerful arrangements for upgrading humanity and allowing people to live their lives with more sense of happiness and peace.
Couple of concepts you hit here that I don't think people fully understand. First of all, lust, love, and selflessness. Could you take selflessness first? Is that important? Is that an important characteristic to have as a leader that would steer you from the problems that may be confronting our nation?
Extremely.
Explain
Because the
that to
leader
us.
should be servitude conscious. Leader should be in the mood of being the caretaker and the servant of those who one has under their regime or jurisdiction. But the tendency is the leaders often see themselves as the dictators, the autocrats. They see themselves as the manipulators of the power rather than being the facilitators for the services that bring about the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Our issue that we're dealing with, which is one of the biggest problems in the world, is a crisis in leadership. We lack visionary leaders. We lack leaders who lead from the inside out. Most leaders lead from the outside in.
But Swami, what does that have to do with a person of power, in a leadership position, and there could be many leadership positions, jumping in bed with somebody?
Gratification is just an extension of one's mindset that is about control, enjoyment, profits, distinctions for oneself or one's party only.
But now,
You see what I mean? Sex life itself. Now, there's nothing wrong with sex.
Okay,
I mean,
that's where I was going.
It is natural for people to procreate.
Okay.
Sexuality is universal. It has always been there, always will be there.
Okay.
But sexuality is different from genitology. People have a tendency of thinking that love is only sex and is only genital connections. People have a tendency of thinking that happiness is coming so much from only the genitals. And so therefore we find that individuals are not being able to have deep union, deep loving experiences, because it's so much based on just the physical body trying to connect with another physical body, or the genital trying to connect with another genital.
And you can never have ultimate satisfaction with that.
You cannot. Because why? Because real satisfaction, real love is based on connecting with another person's essence. And as long as relationships are so much based on just the externals, based on what is, based on some physical beauty, based on some sort of economic consideration or prestige, these kind of things are superficial because they're always changing. Now, also, when people think that they're just a physical entity only, then it's very superficial because they're not, again, relating to the real person. The real person is that spirit presence that's inside of the body, is that conscience that's inside of the body. So what's happening now is that many people in the Western countries, especially, and gradually all around the world, are being controlled by their genital. Look how every advertisement, from condominiums to houses to
MTV,
pencils, is based on stimulating a person's genitals. So people are beginning to think through the genital rather than through the mind and through the intelligence. And so that brings so much lust instead of love.
So then is lust a prerequisite for what the younger people in my generation would call freaking out? So they'd start with a sexual contact, then that would no longer be sufficient, so then they'd have to do something else, and then eventually masochism or all kinds of what I would term perverse interactions then take place. And then the bottom line, when you go through it all, then you're still empty.
That's right. That's just a small part of it. It's a conscious factor first. See, as to the degree that there's so much egocentricity, self-centeredness, then one is thinking that one is to lord over all that they survey. A man one day, a woman another day, an animal another day, with themselves another day, and still they're not happy. But when it's really based on the idea of honoring another person's essence, when it's based on the individual, him or herself, being whole, then whole persons come together.
So that sounds like prerequisite for real sexual interaction, love,
Exactly.
Honoring, a sense of consciousness. Well, then what happens?
Let me just hit one point on this first. Just like, because many people listening, they're having trouble in their relationships. Now, one of the things that happens usually is a man is looking for a woman who's going to make him complete. A woman is looking for a man who's going to make her complete. Or maybe they're in the same gender, looking for someone who's going to make them complete. So what happens? Two incomplete people come together with the idea the other person is going to make it happen for him or for her, and they experience depression and sadness because they come together with the idea of trying to get something rather than individuals who are somewhat whole in themselves looking for a partner who's also somewhat whole. Those persons come together and they produce an amazing explosion of happiness, of understanding, and of real love.
So if I take that, in your book, you're probably, in that statement, coming out of your book, saying individuals have to work on that personal getting themselves in order, being whole, being spiritually anchored, before they can even really get into a love relationship. And then in an order of things, anchoring yourself in wholeness and centrality, love, and then a sexual union with another person that feels the same way about themselves, but then can appreciate your essence.
And that's very scientific because it's also based on principles of physics.
So you teach that.
Oh, we teach
How do you
so many
teach that?
things. Because instead of someone looking for someone to love them, if they themselves are loving, they will draw love out of others. They will draw similar. But if they're feeling incomplete and looking for somebody to make them complete, they'll just get more incompleteness.
Okay. I was in Chicago recently. Happened to turn a TV show on, and it was the Pimp's Ball. And they were showing excerpts of all these prostitutes on the street. But the thing that resonated in my mind was a pimp that said to a prostitute that he had out on the street doing all kinds of things. You see, I make you feel whole. I'm the one that loves you and cares about you. Now, I found that totally incongruent with my thinking. But there's a whole cadre of women and men out there in that kind of relationship. Will your book help people escape that kind of thing, and how?
Especially those people. Believe it or not, Percy, most people now are feeling very empty, are looking for love, and somehow not finding it. Why do we find more and more people involve themselves in gangs? They're also looking for love, for bonding, for community, for fellowship. See, as we move more and more focusing on modernity, we're becoming more impersonal. Technology and science, unfortunately, is causing us to become more impersonal with the computers, the fax, the satellites. So individuals are talking at each other. They're not relating very much. They're being able to be somewhat functioning with their lives without having to really have so much community. So we replace community with commodities. And by doing that, individuals are feeling more and more incomplete. They're not getting the inner nourishment. And that's very sad.
Two things. 'Cause this is just wonderful. But you trigger so many questions in me every time we meet. And I don't know which order to answer this, but in your literature, you refer to the source of love to heal our various madness. And then you just cited a word that I don't think people in this country have a clue on, and that's community. So I'd like for you to address what you meant by source of love to heal our various madness, and what madness are you speaking of? Then I'd like you to come back and address what is community.
On two levels. Racism, tribalism, genderism, religious fanaticism are all expressions of lust in interacting. Misplaced love. Again, as people are looking at their own sovereign situation, not being holistic, not being eclectic, not realizing their essence and other people's essence, then there'll be so many fragmentations based on those externals. But as individuals are becoming more in tune with themselves, becoming more genuinely godly, loving, then they begin to see the God presence in everyone. And they begin to relate to that, which brings out the higher quality in the individuals they interact with, and that comes back on them, and it affects the environment.
Okay, so in terms of the madness, going back to the Chicago scenario with the prostitutes, if I'm the pimp, then because I can see the essence of God in you, there's no way I would advocate that I put you on the street to sell your body and be devalued
That's
in
right.
any way. Nor if I'm a young Turk on the street corner, no way could I become so hostile and angry that I would pull a pistol out and shoot your life, because in effect, when I take your life out, I'm attacking God.
Mhm.
Is that a
That's
correct
right.
understanding?
That's right.
So,
And similarly, even also in this male-female relationship, that if the wife sees the husband, let's take it to another level, as a gift from God, the husband sees the wife as a gift from God, they both see the children as a gift from God, then this is powerful. Because if they see it only as their husband, their wife, their children, then they relate to that person based on their desires, which means that they want to be manipulative, they want to batter the wife, if they want to ignore, then they do because it's their property. But if they see it as a property of God and they're the caretaker, then how powerful each person thinking that way in a selfless mood for the service of God.
how much sexual interaction should man and woman have that have come together under matrimony?
We find that people who have very deep, loving relationships, that when they do have sex, it is much more powerful because they're connecting with essence. They do not have to have sex as frequently as people who are dealing on the surface. As a matter of fact, when people have very deep, deep love, even just to look at each other's eyes, just to touch each other, just to smell each other's perfume or cologne, has a tremendous stimulation that can be as great as even sometimes a physical
Is that
contact.
the spiritual wisdom coming out of you, or is that the romantic coming
This
out
is
of you?
the spiritual wisdom. See, sex itself is very spiritual. Those who master sex energy have even greater knowledge about it. For instance, we talk about procreation. See, now people are having sex without being accountable and not performing the proper environment or conditions to maximize the benefit. Spiritually, when people have sex, they should prepare themselves. They do it in the most holy way. They hear nice music, they make prayers, they honor each other, because the consciousness of the man and woman when they unite.
So this is not a backseat car romp.
Not at all. Listen to this. The consciousness of the man and woman when they unite affects the kind of soul that they draw to that womb.
Okay.
So when people are having sex and they don't want to be accountable, they don't want the natural effects of that, they don't really love the person, it's only a matter of physical stimulation. And even once the baby, the soul comes into the womb, they don't want it. That is having such an effect on the conscience of that particular entity. No wonder the children are becoming more violent when they're being brought into the world based on violence, self-centeredness, rather than love.
What's the recipe?
The recipe is for people to realize how much they can enjoy life on a higher level by literally bringing in the God factor. Make a triangle. Put God there. The man and woman. And everything that they're doing is based on an offering to the Godhead.
Okay. Let's tie this topic, transforming lust and love. How important is community in that? And that was the question I asked you. But I want you to show me a relationship with community and your new book.
The relationship is that as we get away from just commodities, individualism, and we look at what our actions have, what they bear or what they bring to others, then as we do things, we're thinking about the consequences constantly. What will be for the well-being of the greatest number of people in the particular environments that we're associating in. Then we have greater sense of accountability. And individuals do things not just considering the moment or considering their idea, their pleasure, but they're looking at family, community.
Community, and the community that's steeped in love. You talk in your book about global consequences of misdirected sexual energy. Tell me about that, and also go back and redefine for me sexual energy.
See, sex energy in some systems is referred to as prana, as chi. It has so much to do with the life force that is within the physical body. Because the soul itself is, in Sanskrit we say, satchitananda vigraha. The soul is full of bliss, full of knowledge, and it's eternal. And it's always in union. Everything in one sense or another is one polarity, another polarity connecting, trying to meet. So in one sense, everything in creation is about sexuality. But it's unfortunate when we minimize real union, and we are just like people come to a community to get out of, to see what they can get out of community, rather than what they can share and experience.
And give.
So similarly, people are coming in relationships, trying to see what they can take rather than what they can share and what they can give.
So that's the focus on the curvature of the body, the bosom,
That's right.
the makeup, the physical attractiveness, and we miss the beauty. Because I would think that when you talk about essence, the God essence, the flesh has nothing to do with it.
That's right. It's very temporary.
Very temporary.
And that's why we have, as we're having now. In 1910, about 20% of marriages were Indian divorce. In 1950, about 70%. 1990, 68%. A lot of it has to do with people getting away from the natural order of things, becoming more self-centered, and being more bombarded by individualism.
Less selflessness.
Less selflessness.
Okay. The global impact. What's
The
happening
global
here?
impact is, first, the family is a microcosm of the nation, of the planet. And so when the family units are falling apart, of course, the racial, the national, the tribal units will fall apart.
What would you say to young people today who are highly sexual, and we're just about 2 minutes away from closing this show out? What would you say to the young people today who have all of this highly charged sexual energy? I mean, it's going, you know as well, back into the elementary grades. Kids are attracted
See,
by
it's
that.
very difficult because there's an increase in pornography, there's an increase in advertisements and propaganda, and because people are beginning to think that this is the way to enjoy. There's an increase in the sound vibrations, the music, the lyrics that people are hearing. It's all stimulating the lower chakras, the lower energies. So we would suggest to them, do not be a slave of the senses. This is not the times. We enter the 21st century to be a slave to anything. And one who does not have greater control of their sexuality will surely be a slave of modernity, a slave of materialism, a slave of self-centeredism.
That's a good point to kind of stop on, Swami. We've been sitting here talking about a very critical subject to our national existence. I'd like to say our national security and put it into the political arena. I think this is probably the most pressing concern that we have in our nation today, because I can see that this void that you talk about, this lack of an essence of God inside of people, leads us into drug addiction, violence, and all of it. So your new book, I'd say, is state-of-the-art on this. I hope people will read your book. I'm Dr. Percy Thomas, and I've been here with Swami Krishnapad, Transformation of Lust to Love. Thank you. Welcome to Have You Heard? I'm Dr. Percy Thomas, Provost of Continuing Education at Montgomery College. Have You Heard is a program that brings topics of interest to the Montgomery County community. Today, we're talking about transforming lust into love. And we're continuing this series with none other than the great spiritual leader, Swami Krishnapad. Swami, welcome back to the show. When we talked last, we were talking about this topic of transforming lust into love and your new book, The Spiritual Warrior, and we couldn't get through it all. You warned me that we would not be able to get through it all, and as that saga ended, if I could use a little drama here, it ended with you talking about the global impact of sexual energy, sexual misuse, sexual abuse, power. But I want to come back and focus a little narrowly on the global impact. And then we're going to take off, and we want the audience out there to hang loose, because we're running fast on transforming lust into love.
You know, some very interesting, insightful things are coming out. For instance, in the allopathic field, Dean Ornish has been helping many people in different places in the world to understand how love and intimacy is underlining all aspects of life. It's being discovered that people who do not feel intimate, do not feel loved, they are less likely to recuperate from any type of disease, especially chronic diseases. They do not live as long, and they're not productive as those who experience intimacy. And there's so many studies from the top universities in the world. Now let me explain some short points about this. One's belief system, how one feels about intimacy, the degree that one is feeling loved, affects the brain, the hypothalamus, and the limbic systems. That the mind sends through neurotransmitters messages to the cells that affect every aspect of the body. So when one is feeling unloved, it sends certain kind of messages to the cells, causes or underlines for all types of diseases, or weakens the immune system. So from a physiological perspective, from a psychological, now we're finding that more and more people are having mental illness. The World Health Organization says in the next 15 years, one of the greatest problems facing the world, as great as cancer and heart disease, will be mental illness. Suicide is increasing. We look at the things that's happening in the political arenas. Tremendous leaders have lost their position to lead based on not being able to control their genitals. Even wars have been put in place by people who are acting on lust, and that lust and greed has caused multi-millions of people's lives to be taken. So from a physiological perspective, from health, psychological, and a global perspective for the well-being of humanity, it's important that we conquer over the lust and transform it to love.
Okay. When you started talking about the neurology of it and the cognitive aspects of how thought links with physiology, it reminded me of biblical scripture and the essence of what John is trying to tell us in Revelations. And I want you to kind of connect this up for me. Basically, if I can remember it correctly, it says, change how you think and act. When we're talking about this negative impact in terms of the impact on the physiology, the health problems, what are the cognitive things that need to be changed in the mind that then will lead to behavioral changes? Because that's what we're talking about. And it seems to me, thousands of years ago, John had that revelation about that. Is that a spiritual connection with what you're talking about?
Very spiritual.
Can you explain that? Because that's kind of hard for a lay person to understand.
Very spiritual and very material also.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, billions of dollars now are being arranged to help facilitate people who have heart troubles, because insurance companies and doctors are realizing that intimacy is working, that people who feel cared for, who feel loved, that it makes a difference. And it's a financial consideration. We are spiritual beings who are naturally loving. When we do not experience that love from others, or when we do not give that love, it produces all kind of inauspiciousness, all kind of unnatural things happen when we do not do the natural. But now people are often afraid to love because they're afraid that if they really give themselves, they'll be abused. They're afraid that if they try to love, they'll not get the reciprocation. And in most cases, they have not experienced real loving care. And it's hard to try to be something and to act upon that when all around you the opposite, when all around you the environment, sociologically, politically, economically, is all saying, live for yourself, get what you can for you or your group, and do it the best way you can, and that is success. Mm-hmm. And so we have to get out of that kind of paradigm.
That sounds like selfishness to me.
That's selfishness.
And selfishness, then, if I'm making a stretch with what you're teaching here, mm-hmm. then selfishness has a high correlation with disease, illness.
That's right, because when we're not feeling protected, cared for, we're not feeling intimacy, then we send that message throughout our bodies.
So if you're in a relationship, though you're having a lot of sexual transmission and it's good, mm-hmm. feels good,
sure.
But without that intimacy there, that's at least one criteria, that a signal, red flag,
yes.
that love is not present.
That's right.
And if the essence of God is not there, and I don't know how we recognize that, and I'm going to ask you that question, but let's say in my global understanding of what a creator is, if the essence of the creator is not there, you don't have love. But
that is really important, Percy. And that's kind of a bottom line. We really can't be genuinely loving without spiritual connection.
well, how do we know when we have it?
Because, well, two ways. First, because we are servants of God, and we're part and parcels of God, and our real essence is that of spirituality. Then if we try to have deep relationship without recognizing our essence, then it's all circuitous. And so it all has to come back to the nucleus, spiritual nucleus, a God-conscious nucleus. Now, since we even often use religion as like a profession, or we use it for business, so no wonder even people who are so-called religious are still not feeling so much love, because they are being more religious than spiritual, or they're being more involved in the ritual and the external rather than the internal.
Okay, let me ask you a toughie. You told me I could ask you anything, and I'm going to ask you this tough one, because I got some brothers out there and some people out there that are struggling with this. Infidelity in their marital relationships, and are convinced that they love both partners. How does the whole concept of lust and love fit into the notion of infidelity and incest and all of these things that are the results of sexual energy in a relationship?
Whether it's a heterogeneous or homogeneous relationship, etc., what is not acceptable by natural laws and spiritual laws is adultery, fornication, illicit sex.
Okay, that's pretty bottom line.
Illicit sex is always unhealthy because it's
What
unhealthy.
is illicit sex?
Illicit sex is when there is sex where the natural connection is not able to come from that. When people come together for union, the natural thing that comes out of that love and that real union is procreation, is something, a creation that comes from those two beings coming together to honor each other. When we have that kind of situation without being ready to honor the life that comes from that wonderful connection, then it is not fully natural.
So all that stuff that goes on in the red light districts across the nation is illicit sex.
It's illicit, and it's the opposite of what sex should be about. Sex should be under wonderful environments where people think about it before they even involve themselves. It's because it's like a festival that they're ready to participate in. It should be under, nice music. It should be with someone who you're really ready to be with. It should be where you're ready to take the consequences of that. And then you have wonderful connection based on really raising consciousness on the planet, rather than being another person who involves themselves in bringing down consciousness by minimizing humanity, minimizing real relationship.
Okay. I perceive in you a great presence of caring, selflessness, and humanity. I also know you're a very spiritual man. You are a scholar of the Bible, so you have a command of that. And we know biblically that there are places in the Bible that speak to the issue of homosexuality. We move it up into our day and time, gay and lesbianism. And yet, in our population, some demographers say there's at least 10% of the population that fit into the category of gay or lesbian. I'm not casting a judgment here, but people who are gay and who are lesbian enter love relationships with each other all the time. My guess is some of it is lust, but how do you explain that in the context of the spiritual warrior to transform? I'm having a tough time with this. This is a tough subject that people have difficulty with, but lust into love when you're talking about a homogeneous or homosexual encounter.
I get letters from all over the world on the Spiritual Warrior 2 book, even though it's only been out for a few months. And many of those letters are from the gay community, particularly those who are spiritually inclined. And so we explain some things about gay and lesbian considerations in our first chapter. Now, we'll emphasize first that everybody's looking for love. It doesn't matter, heterosexual, homosexual, and love is a real issue. We also explain some things in relationship to reincarnation, because there are sociological, physiological, and there are spiritual reasons for homosexuality. And many of these metaphysical and spiritual reasons most people are not aware of. So we try to help individuals to understand that, because there's sometimes someone who is having a material masculine body, but is having a mental and psychological consciousness that of a female. So we have cases where we have a woman who is captured or caught up in a man's body, or a man who's caught up in a woman's body, based on previous life's activities and the consciousness that carries on from that. Say, for instance, real brief, someone in a last life was very masculine, weightlifter, big champion, weighing 250 pounds, lots of muscles. That person was so much thinking on those terms, involving themselves in that kind of physical activity. In the next life, they come back in a female's body, looking like a model, very feminine, but they'll still have sometimes some of that masculine conscience from a previous life that's now within that feminine body.
You just opened up a whole big arena, and I didn't miss it.
There are many, many factors.
Come back to this notion of past life, current life. Where does that belief originate, and how does that connect up?
Well, it's one of the most universal truisms. Reincarnation is an integral part of early Christianity, and one who does exegesis, does Christian history study, will find that Origen, St. Jerome, some of the early Christian founders were fully accepting this, wrote things on this. Only later that reincarnation gets somewhat taken out or thrown out of present Christianity. It's a part of Hinduism, Buddhism, Taoism, Zoroastrianism, Native American Indian philosophy, Greek and ancient philosophy. It's a part of African American philosophy, African culture. Native American teachings. If we go one place around the world to another, we'll find that reincarnation is accepted. Only those places that's become recently influenced by certain Western cosmology is their question. Reincarnation simply means every action produces a corresponding reaction. Now, there's so many studies showing...
That's basic physics. Huh?
Basic physics. So when we look at an individual, then, we're looking at a personality that's now dominant, that's accumulation of other psychological things that have come together to make that particular personality in this life and previous lifetimes.
What challenges do you have when you're working with your ministry around the world to bring this very hard concept? I consider myself an educated person. I'm sitting here struggling with this concept. And yet, intuitively, I feel it's right. How do you...
It's very simple.
How do you bring it...
Just like my Western part as a psychotherapist.
Yes.
There are psychiatrists and psychotherapists who do hypnotherapy. Some of them do regression research.
Okay.
This is a very, behavioristic thing that can be examined.
Right.
And so there are books and studies where people have regressed individuals back to previous lifetimes. They've been able to research, to check on what things they say, what things they report, and they're just amazed. There's so much material that helps one to accept and believe that there's existence. There are also techniques of raising one's consciousness where one can be aware of previous lifetimes.
Okay.
So
this is a whole other topic.
There's the behavioristic perspective, and there's a metaphysical. What we're constantly looking at in these discussions and in my books is that we're looking at life in a very holistic way.
Okay.
We're looking at man as a physical being who has a metaphysical aspect, a physical aspect, and actually is the soul or the spiritual.
Okay. You speak so eloquently and knowledgeable on this topic, and we have so much devastation in our country around sexual energy, the lack of love, the lack of a selfless community perspective. And yet, when we examine pretty much the curricula on most college campuses, the kinds of things that you are educating the world about is absent from the curriculum. Is there a place for teachings around transforming lust into love, should it be in the curriculum?
Definitely. We started to name this book Everything That Dr. Ruth Didn't Tell You. But as we were talking with her, she said she has her own book coming out, and she suggested that we, that we didn't. Because sexuality is much more, and teaching sexuality is much more than just teaching people about how to, when to use condoms, or use condoms. It has much more to do with than just basic gender considerations. For instance, here's an example. We're finding that incest is increasing and child abuse. Now, as long as people are thinking that love is sex, then why not? Then no wonder people are now beginning to have more sex with their own children and with children in general, because love has become so much an external thing about genitals coming together. And so now more people are beginning to manifest that connection with even their own children, since they're being so much bombarded with the notions and with the environment that sex itself is love.
Well, when you talk about that, I'm reminded of seeing a prison expose. And I was just kind of shocked at the male prisoners who just very openly talk about all these various ways they abuse other prisoners.
Yes.
And under the nomenclature of making love in prison. So you're saying basically there's a pervasiveness and a preoccupation with the genitalia that drives that. How do we get away from it? How do we move a nation? We got a president that's in the news. We've had several Congress people. We've had ministers. The pulpit is not absent in this regard from sexual promiscuity. We had little kids in the early grades now coming to school acting out sexual acts. It's a groundswell. It's all around us. What's the solution?
It shows how serious that it is. I was just giving a workshop to a group of Trappist monks in Atlanta about 2 weeks ago. And I was just describing how it's just so pervasive, because the music we hear, the food we eat, the clothes we wear, most people wear, all of these things are sending a message, a sexual message. So we have to be much more careful and not being so locked in to just dealing with the externals. And so it really comes down to the simple but difficult issue of developing more compassion and selflessness, and not being so attracted to only material commodities, but trying to go beyond that.
I know you have an understanding of the capitalist enterprise here in America and what drives business, bottom line. And these terms, marketing and sales, are not unfamiliar to you. What you're talking about is a multi-billion-dollar industry.
That's right. It's a big revolution.
What do you say to people who sustain themselves, Hustler magazine, Playboy, even our movies now? When I was a kid, you never really saw real hard kissing on the screen. It was implicit, but you never really saw it. Now you have full body nudity in our movies. They're making billions of dollars on it. How are we going to climb this mountain?
We have to look at the consequences, just like it's been proven.
What are the consequences?
It's been proven again and again that, for instance, pornography brings in organized crime. Pornography breaks up families. Pornography brings in heavy kinky sex. Pornography brings in more incest and child abuse, etc. All of these things have been documented again and again. Leaders, or the elite, they make up the people make up the elite and the leaders. The people should make the leaders more accountable. If people stop buying these things, then we'll find a change. Because it makes money, then those who are in leadership position will constantly keep putting this before the public.
Okay.
Pornography is one of the biggest growth businesses in the world right now.
Now I'm going to hit entertainment. Charles Barkley has gone on record saying he's nobody's role model. And there are many national sports figures and entertainment figures that do not scrutinize their behavior. Do you think they have a responsibility in this, helping to make this transformation?
They have the biggest responsibility. Because when people, for instance, by the time a child is 18 years old in America, they've already seen something like about 400,000 violent crimes, 50,000 murders, and a lot of that is violence and sex. When we constantly keep feeding the youth, feeding people in general, these kind of notions, ideas, when they're constantly imbibing that, we're creating more and more of an endangered planet. We're going to have more fragmentations of relationships, fragmentations of races, fragmentations of nations based on that.
Okay. I want to go back to this conversation we had earlier, which is mind-boggling to me, because my sexual interactions in the bedroom, I believe, is equal to my partner, and out of a sense of love, yet a high sense of sensitivity for the sensory things that are going on when that happens. But this notion of me or anyone entering a bedroom situation for power is mind-boggling. And what are the consequences of that? Could you address this power dynamic? Because a lot of people looking at this show are people like me who think they're really good people and great people, and they don't have a clue that they're playing this dynamic out.
Yes, and that's why we find it more than not among people who are in very powerful positions, political, business world, and we see even sometimes in the religious societies, that more than not, leaders are cheating. They're cheating when it comes to sex and sometimes money, but almost most of the time when it comes to sex.
Swami, you're making a really
very powerful
statement here.
Powerful statement from visiting so many places, traveling around the world, meeting with leaders, and from being a personal consultant to many leaders in many of these areas and knowing what's going on in their particular lives. When we are too much into wanting to control for our own egos, it's almost impossible not to be promiscuous when it comes to sex life, because that becomes an extension. One who wants to control, one who enjoys so much having power over others' lives, using people for their pleasure, then just becomes an extension of that same pleasure-seeking potential that one is trying to get for themselves.
So the sexual act is at some point just becomes a sideline event.
It's just the external manifestation of a conscious factor. The consciousness is so much based on my pleasure, my distinction, my adorations, my profit. And therefore, things that I see is for me to enjoy. And it doesn't matter. Somebody else's wife, somebody else's daughter, someone's son, someone's, etc. It doesn't matter. And that's why we see this on the rise. And especially where people are really into power and are not really being genuine leaders based on coordinating the services, but they're leaders with the idea of putting their agenda on others. And so that means they put themselves on others, and they want to enjoy.
So if you were speaking to the World Association of Professional Athletes, and you had 30 seconds to tell them something right now, I want you to look in the camera and tell them what you tell them.
We tell them that they have one of the biggest responsibilities in being able to change world consciousness, because what leaders do, others will do. And especially since these persons are so much followed by so many of the masses, we see the money and the attention that goes to these leaders, that they have a responsibility, and they're being watched by God. And so they should be much more careful.
And that statement is true for the athletes as well as the presidents,
that's right,
the shamans, the sheiks, anybody that's in a power position over someone else.
There's heavy consequences, karmic consequences, when you have power over others' lives and when you abuse that.
Okay. If you were to outline for people, you're going to do a workshop, and you do many workshops. If you're going to outline for people what the outcome of the workshop, what they would get out of your workshop, and what the essence of your work, the teachings would be, and you just have a few seconds to tell somebody what you're going to teach them and what's going to happen after they get your teaching.
We're talking about 5 things. They'll be able to resolve conflicts so much more expediently. They will be much more healthier. They'll have a greater sense of appreciation of humanity. They'll begin to love on a deeper level, and life will seem so much more joyous for them, beyond a question.
And you haven't said a lot about peace, but I would imagine that there's a connection between the transforming lust into love, and a correlation with a peaceful life.
Exactly, because when one has peace within themselves, then they put peace into the environment. When one is feeling unloved, then what happens? One strikes out for love. One searches one tries to get those things for their survival. And so that produces sometimes violence.
And the final heavy piece, and I know you won't be able to deal with that, so many people have this notion, I'm in love with myself, and therefore there's masturbation around this sexual energy, and they don't even want to even move towards a relationship with someone else. It's all internal.
It's completely artificial, because love means service. It means relationship. It means again, community. When you love someone, you want to do things for them. You want to do things with them. But since we're not individuals on our own, but we are always in relationship. Everything is in connection. Even atoms, neutrons, protons are interacting. Everything in creation is interacting in some kind of relationship. For someone to think that they can just only affect themselves, love themselves, get pleasure for themselves in that kind of way, is totally unnatural.
Then scripturally, you agree with John when John talks about love as being our highest commandment, and then all things flow from that. Love your enemy, love your neighbor, and all of that.
It's not only in John, but it's in every tradition, every bona fide religious tradition of the world emphasizes about the power of love being the greatest power. And it starts from first loving God. As we love God genuinely, we become loving, and we share that love wherever we go.
Well, that's a good place to wrap this up. And what I'd like for people to know, because, you know, if I were to commercialize you, I'd say the master of love. But if you want to get in contact with Swami Krishnapad and his teachings, call 1-800-949-5333. 1-800-949-5333. I'm Dr. Percy Thomas, and you've been viewing Have You Heard? And we've been talking about transforming lust into love in the new book, The Spiritual Warrior 2, by none other than Swami Krishnapad. We enjoyed having you.